For this lesson, we're going to be looking at types of bias. So the first one is sampling bias. And sampling bias is bias that's resulting from a sampling frame that doesn't reflect the characteristics of the population. So for example, if I'm looking at which grade 12 courses should be offered in summer school, and if I'm asking a bunch of grade 9s, that sampling frame doesn't make sense for who I'm targeting and the results I want to get. So that's what's called sampling bias. Next is non-response bias. This is bias occurring when a particular group is underrepresented or chose not to respond. So this often happens with our voluntary response. So maybe my survey is way too long, so people don't choose to respond. Maybe it's about a topic that not everyone's really passionate about, so the only people who respond are those who have very, very strong feelings about the topic. Next is response bias. This is bias that occurs when participants in a survey deliberately give false or misleading answers. This typically occurs if maybe an answer could be embarrassing or people don't want to share that information. Then we have measurement bias. Measurement bias results from data collection that consistently under or overestimates the characteristics of a population. So maybe I've picked the wrong sampling method here, and it's really not giving me all of the information I need. Okay, another really important piece is our wording of questions. One thing we want to avoid is what's called a leading question. A leading question prompts a particular answer. So for example, as a part of a survey of the greatest hits of all time, a radio station asks its listeners, what was the best song by the Beatles? And they provide these options here. Now, this is a leading question because it's prompting you to only give a song by the Beatles, right? So which is the best song by the Beatles? And we're looking at the greatest hits of all time. So that is a leading question there. It also gives you a very tight selection. So maybe if you're not very familiar with the Beatles, maybe you only recognize one of these songs, and so you only choose that one. Next is what's called a loaded question. And a loaded question is a question containing information or language intended to influence the respondent's answers. So for example, do you favor the proposed bylaw in which the government will dictate whether you have the right to smoke in a restaurant? Now this is a little bit confusing. Do I favor something that I don't agree with? It's just very confusing, and it may prompt you to not answer the way that you intend to. So that's what we need to look at here. So let's do some examples to indicate the type of bias. So this first one, students are watching a lacrosse game and are asked whether fundraising money should go to extracurricular activities or to the science department. So this is an example of sampling bias. It's likely that if I'm asking students at a lacrosse game what we should spend money on, that they're also going to say extracurriculars. So how can I fix this? I could run the survey. During lunch when all students can respond. So for example, B, participants in a survey find the average number of cars per household in the GTA, and they're randomly chosen from the Markham phone book. So what we want to do is, what is the bias here? This is an example of measurement bias. So this is measurement bias because we're looking in the whole GTA, but I chose to use a sampling method in which I split my population into groups, and the group I choose to look at is just Markham. and then I randomly search in there. So because that's the sampling method I picked and it doesn't work, this is measurement bias. So what we should do is we should ask commuters from all over the GTA. Okay. For example C, surveys on environmental issues are randomly given to students in the cafeteria. The majority of surveys are not returned. The response to the surveys is overwhelmingly in support of an increased environmental awareness. So most didn't come back. So this would be an example of non-response bias. Now, how could we eliminate this bias? We could make it a mandatory survey. Or we could provide incentive. So we could give a prize for completing it or something along those lines. So, a teacher asked the class how many people did not do their homework last night. So this may be a situation where not everybody wants to respond. Therefore, this would be response bias. A student may not want to respond to this because it may not be something they want to share in front of the whole class. How could you fix this? You could just make it anonymous. Okay, now let's look at some different types of questions. And we'll look at some of the issues with these survey questions here. So the first one says, I disagree with people a lot, agree, neither, disagree. So this one here is just very, very confusing language. There's a bit of a double negative in there, so it's really confusing. So that's our problem. We have difficult, confusing language. And how I could fix the question is I could say, how often do you disagree with people? Next says, do you seek to engage in espionage, sabotage, export control violations, or any other illegal activity while in the USA? This is very much a loaded question. There is so much information in there that it's really hard to understand how you should answer the question, right? You're unsure now, am I answering the way I want to? I don't know, there's so much going on. So a better question could just be, what are your plans in the USA? Okay, the next one says, did you enjoy our amazing new product? This is a perfect example of a leading question. This is because they're saying our amazing new product. They're encouraging you to talk about how much you enjoyed it and not really giving you the opportunity to say no. So they're leading your answer. So you could just say, were you satisfied with our product? The next one says, did you hear about our service from a friend, a newspaper, TV or radio, a colleague at work, online? What if I didn't hear it from any of those things? That's a problem. So this restricts choice, and we can't have that. So what I could do is I could just add an other option so that somebody could fill in their real answer. Next one, do we always shower at night? So this word always is a problem. Maybe a person showers at night very often, but not always. So we can't use words like always or never or things like that. So we can't have what's called an absolute question. We want to avoid those. So what we could say is, do you shower at night? The next one says, under option 5, the Circuit General District cores would be co-located in an urban ring development area, either in the same building or in separate adjacent buildings with courts complex. Please rank the following attributes for this type of courts complex in terms of creating court docket efficiencies: proximity to my office, other courts, the jail, law offices, other. So this is very, very confusing. So there's a lot of difficult language going on here. And there's so much going on in one sentence that this would definitely be a loaded question. Now, how could I fix that? I definitely have to simplify the words. Or I could maybe break it down into multiple questions. Just to make it clearer. Okay, and the last one, how would you rate the speed and usefulness of our service? Well, what if the speed was good, but the usefulness wasn't good? What if the speed was bad, but the usefulness was pretty good? What's happening here is there's not enough options, and it's not allowing me to rate these individually. This type of question, where there's 2 questions, but I'm only allowed 1 answer, is called a double-barreled question. And we can't have these. Again, what a double-barreled question is I have 2 questions here and only 1 answer. So I'm rating the speed and usefulness at the same time, but what if I don't have the same answer for both? So what I would have to do is I'd have to break it down into 2 questions.